Hello Bobcats! We're going to continue with linear relationships, but now we're going to talk about independent and dependent variables. Okay, so many real-world situations involve two variables, quantities, in which one quantity depends on the other. These quantities are called independent and dependent variables. You might have heard of this in science class. It is important that you be able to identify the independent and dependent variables in a linear relationship when given a table or a graph. So, which means that whether you're given a table or a graph, you have to identify which is the independent and which is the dependent variable. So the independent variable, which is also known as x, may have its value freely chosen without considering the values of any other variable. Okay? So this is what it depends on. And usually, here's a little hint for you guys. Usually time is almost always independent. So whether it's talking about like hours or anything related to time, most likely it's going to be the independent variable and it's going to be on the x-axis on a graph. Now the dependent variable, also known as y, depends on the other variable. So the dependent will always depend on the independent variable. You cannot determine its value without first knowing the other variable. So for the y, for the dependent, you must have the independent in order for you to know what the value is of whatever you're looking for. Most likely, almost always, the total of something will be the dependent variable. So if you're talking about total, or like the final cost, whatever indicates total, it most likely will always be the dependent variable. Okay? Take note of this. This is going to be very important. It's going to come very handy. Okay, x will be independent, y will be dependent. Okay, so now let's identify them in graphs. So here I have x and y. Remember, x is independent and y is dependent. So let's look at this graph here where it says clay used in art class. So it's already labeled for us. So this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. So the x-axis, we know that this is our independent variable. And, oh, sorry, I misspelled that really bad. Just do independent variable. And then our y-axis is going to be our dependent variable. Okay? So because you need to know how much clay the teacher bought in order for you to determine how much clay the class is going to get. So let's look at the second table here. This is not, we don't have it labeled, but we know that this is our x-axis and this is our y-axis. And again, our x-axis is going to be our independent variable and our y-axis is going to be our dependent variable. And if you also look at the labeling, we have time. And remember how we talked about in our previous slide that time will be the independent variable because you need to know your total earnings depend on the hours that you work. So again, time is independent and total earnings is dependent. And same goes for this example. So if we have tables here, we need to identify the independent and dependent variable. So if it's not labeled for us, usually the first column is going to be your x variable and then the second one is going to be your y variable. Remember, x is your independent variable and y is your dependent variable. Okay? The cost depends on the number of songs. Same thing goes if they are horizontal. Usually the first row will be x and then the bottom or the second one is y. Remember, here's your time. Time almost always is independent and if x is independent, then y is your dependent variable. So when you are given either a graph or a table, you can easily identify if it's independent or if it's dependent.